are you wearing that stupid sweater?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Severance Season 2, Episode 7, Chikai Bardo. A lot to discuss in this episode of the podcast. I know a lot of people are joining us on YouTube at youtube.com/@decodingtv. If so, welcome. And I just want to give a shout out, by the way. If you are joining us from YouTube, be sure to check out the podcast Decoding TV, wherever you get your podcasts. We're also covering The White Lotus here on the podcast as well as on the YouTube channel. So check out those conversations as well. I want to just say up front, this episode was very difficult to make notes for. Typically,
I wonder why.
Typically, the show Severance is like very cleanly divided. It's like, okay, what's going on with Dylan? What's going on with Mark? What's going on with Helena? You know, like very easy. And we'll talk about each of the plot lines individually. This episode bounces back and forth between multiple different locations and timelines and characters. And so what I've tried to do is organize them into distinct times and places and people. But just know that like the way we're talking about this episode does not reflect like the experience of watching the episode. Now, before we get to Chikai Bardo, the 7th episode, let's talk about some feedback we got about last week's episode. We also got some YouTube comments that I thought were really great, so I'm going to read those. Austin B at decodingtv.com writes, one thing I've seen a lot online is people thinking Bert is some kind of spy or mole. He's obviously been working for Lumon for a long time, and there definitely appears to have been some collusion between Bert and Drummond to create a window where Irving wouldn't be home, end quote. Yeah, I'm bummed I didn't mention this last week on the podcast. I meant to. Drummond infiltrates Irving's home while he's at dinner with Bert in last week's episode. So there's this open question of like, did they coordinate that in any way, or was Drummond acting of his own volition? I think it's definitely possible there was some coordination there. So just wanted to mention that as a possibility. Patrick Klepek, any theories on that? Or
especially given the episode that you and I just watched and are about to talk about, you know what? Anything is possible, and I lean on syndicated coordination more than anything else, especially after this episode.
Cass is Twisted on YouTube wrote about last week's episode. The irony of Milchick amending his manner of speaking to eliminate big words is that the way he was employing multisyllabic utterances, to coin a phrase, was exactly like the way of speaking employed in all the manuals. Milchick probably spent years honing his vocabulary and practicing so that he spouted Kierisms every time he opened his mouth. And then some child comes along and complains about him, and his performance review is trashed, and his years of hard work, rather than elevating him as he expected, demoted him. It's also a real racist thing to complain about someone's use of language, even though they sound exactly like the complainer. It's almost saying, I can use these fancy words to sound like Kier, and we may give you blackface pictures, but get Kier's words out of your non-white mouth. It's so hard to watch Milchick try to train it out of himself. Painful, end quote. Wanted to acknowledge this is a very valid viewpoint that is how all the manuals speak. They described it as a calamitous orpo. They use big words all the time, and then they're telling Milchick he can't use the words. It's very much a double standard, and I think the show is directly trying to inject race into that observation as well with the paintings. So anyway, great comment from Cassis Twisted. JA240 on YouTube writes, about like, why was it that Helena was talking to Mark's Audi last week, right? Like we were speculating, like, why was she at the restaurant? Was she romantically interested in him? We got a couple questions about that. JA240 on YouTube writes, I think Helena said the wrong name on purpose. I think she was testing Mark because they might already suspect he's reintegrating. Like, she stared at him at the end asking, what's wrong? As if she was waiting for him to recognize her. I think she wanted to know which one she was talking to. Susan on YouTube also writes, I think Helena went to the restaurant to do reconnaissance on Mark. Miss Huang likely reported his nosebleed and odd behavior, and Lumon may be concerned about reintegration. Helena definitely knew Mark's wife's name as he told her what he discovered during the OTC, and she just spent the last week running around Lumon looking for Gemma. She seemed to be trying to determine if Audi Mark remembered Helly or Helena. I think she probably has mixed feelings about Mark, but that's not the primary reason she went to the restaurant, since she blew everything up by mentioning his wife and then getting her name wrong, end quote. So I think those are very plausible theories. Patrick, those strike you as believable?
They do. I think that lines up a lot of where we were teetering on, like 60-40, like where could this go? And so, yeah, those all make sense to me. And again, like heavy finger on the button of like, well, whatever is the most evil and nefarious interpretation of events. Yeah, I feel like that's that one. That's the one that I think is happening until evidence provides me otherwise.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for the comments. You can always comment at decodingtv.com, email us at decodingtv@gmail.com, or comment on YouTube. Love the comments. Love to see people's reactions to our conversations about Severance. And be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, to the podcast, because we talk about TV shows every week, and we'd love to have you as part of those conversations. We got some big stuff coming up. Andor coming up, Last of Us coming up, Daredevil Born Again coming up. So, would love to have you as part of those conversations. Be sure to subscribe. Patrick Klepek, I want to ask you your overall thoughts on season 2, episode 7 of Severance. Chikai Bardo, what'd you think?
It's funny. I was already. This is a sign of a good show. This happens in video games sometimes, where you are told, you sign an embargo, or there's sort of a tacit agreement, like please don't say anything about a thing until a certain time.
Yeah.
But then if people are having a really good time with that thing, they might on social media eyes emoji at a trailer, and it's like, oh, I can make some assumptions that you might have played this and you're already sort of telling us this is interesting. People started breaking embargo before I had watched this episode.
Not cool.
We could watch it early to basically say, if you thought what was
episode 4, right?
Yes. If you thought that episode was wild, wait for this one. I don't think consider that a spoiler as much as it was setting some real expectations.
Yes.
For even you were like, have you watched?
I did that with you via text. I was like,
it's fine. It's fine. It speaks to the, I know going long here on my overall, I think it speaks to the show that people are vibrating in response to it in that way, which is very encouraging. All that to say, I mean, floored from top to bottom on this episode. I think this is. It's a masterclass in its exposition, its lore dump, and emotionally poignant all at the same time, with some of the most interesting, some of the fucking transitions in this episode are breath. I mean, it's just, I was gobsmacked by the end of this episode. So much to consider, so much to think about. It's the kind of one, I think I have to watch that again. I'm pretty sure I'm going to turn to my wife and explain what I think happened. Can you validate what I think we all just watched? An astounding episode of television. Not what I expected. And I don't know. I struggle for words to describe my reaction to it, because it's kind of unlike anything that I have ever seen, especially in a show like this.
It's really incredible, and I do have to throw a shout out to Jessica Lee Gagne, who was the director of this episode. Not typically a director; she has not directed a bunch of things. In fact, I think this might be her first TV thing that she's directed. She's been a cinematographer in many things, including Escape at Dannemora, and I really feel like this is an example where you just give creative control of a show that already has a very clearly defined aesthetic to someone different and say, let them cook. And that's what they did. And Jessica Lee Gagne cooked with this episode, because what we see in this episode is so visually and stylistically distinct from everything else that's happened before. There's filmmaking, color grading, and camera movements and stuff CG usage that's unlike anything in any other episode of Severance. And it makes for something really chilling and remarkable and interesting and intriguing that reveals some information, introduces new questions. So overall, just a remarkable episode of television. And I'm really glad we get to talk about it now. Now, I do just want to say one thing before we get into this, okay? We were able to get this episode early, and we're releasing this podcast right after, shortly after the episode has aired. So basically, there's a lot we probably don't know, and there's probably a lot that's going to come out.
How did you guys miss this? Did you watch the episode?
I have watched the episode twice, and parts of it 3 to 5 times, and so I'm going to try to bring to you as much insight as possible. But we are, Patrick and I, we are the tip of the spear in terms of like people who have watched this episode, and so like over the course of next week, a lot of people are going to like figure things out. They're going to freeze.
We might be doing a whole follow-up segment about this episode next week when people point to X, Y, and Z. It's like, oh yeah, I did miss that, and like that has some really interesting implications.
Yeah. So I am sorry if we missed stuff. Like we're just trying our best to put shit together based off of what we have seen. But just letting people know, like over the course of next week, like people are like, there's going to be much more posting and speculating, and we will assemble all that and like tell you about it on Decoding TV next week. But like right now, we are really in the dark. But I'm going to try to explain to you what we do know. Okay, so I want to start by explaining some things I think we now know based off of the events of this episode.
Okay.
Right? This episode takes place in several different locations and in 2 distinct time frames. There is the past with Mark and Gemma.
Mm-hmm.
The present with Gemma inside Lumon.
Yep.
And then the present with Mark, Ragabi, and Devon at Mark's house.
Yep.
Right? And then kind of like with the present with Gemma and Lumon, there's also like a side plot with Dr. Maurer and Jarmund, but like we can get into that. Anyway, so those are like the 3 distinct time periods and places that are covered this episode. Assuming, of course, that we can take at face value everything that is showed this episode, right? Here are some things I think we know based on this episode, and I want Patrick Klepek, you feel free to react to these, disagree with them if you want. But here's what I think, okay? Number 1, Gemma is definitely still alive. She appears to have the same personality as before when Mark knew her. But she also has a severed personality on the Lumon severed floor. So like Miss Casey is a severed personality of Gemma.
Yes.
Now, we had all suspected that was true, but like now this episode, I think we have definitive confirmation that Gemma is alive. She's Gemma. And then separately, there is Miss Casey, who's her severed
clone theory dead. I
don't know about dead. I don't know about dead.
Yeah, but it does feel like this episode in particular is sort of coming for a lot of popular theories about like what's going on in the show, and just be like boom, boom, push, boom, boom, push, and like elements of those theories could still like exist within the show, but like I feel like this episode, obviously more information can come out and will come out. Like there's much more of the show to go by all measures, but it does feel like this is like setting. What's nice about this episode is I feel like we're getting some a box around certain parts of the show that allow you to then zero in a little more emotionally on trusting a little of what you think is happening and what's in front of you. And I agree with you that on a base level, the Gemma that Mark knows is there, is alive, and would frankly like to be let out.
So I'll see Mark.
Indeed. All right. Thing number 2, Gemma appears to have come to Lumon voluntarily. However, Lumon got her there, like by faking her death or whatever. She appears to be aware that she's part of some broader mission. Whether she's being held voluntarily is obviously a separate question.
Do you think she got
Yeah.
Okay. I agree that her first, obviously, I think that we see the doctor at the fertility clinic, right? In a brief sort of, the doctor passes by her as Mark and her sitting down. I had real questions by the end whether she voluntarily goes to. I think yes. Does her first engagement, like as she's dealing with these little cards and things like that, is there some back and forth? But whether she actually arrives there voluntarily in like the car crash and all that, I have real questions on whether any of that happened voluntarily on her side.
Yeah, okay. I think you're right. That's at best ambiguous. I think it could like my interpretation was she probably went there voluntarily and then like now it's become involuntary. That was my interpretation. But I think you're welcome to have a different interpretation. Otherwise, but like she does appear to understand on some level that like she has been removed from society, that she's part of this broader mission. And that like people on the surface, quote unquote, may have forgotten about her because that's discussed with her explicitly at some point, right? So anyway, TBD on the details of how she got there still. There is a comment. Okay, so here's the big thing. Point number 3. We now know that people can be severed multiple times, right? Depending on which room she goes into, Gemma can have a different personality and a different set of memories. So that's huge. Like that is a huge new introduction to the lore, which is you can have like 3, 5, 10, 30 innies all with their own distinct lives. That's the heavy implication of what's happening here, right, Patrick?
Mm-hmm.
And so she has all these little rooms, and in each little room, it's a different innie. So like it throws into question like everything you're watching, and like who like are we when we're outies? Is that just like another severed form of that person, right? Is there another level of things? Okay, anyway. On that note, I think point 4, it's possible that what we're observing in the show is not what we would describe as base reality. At multiple points in this episode, we see a separate set of macro data refiners that are like bizarro versions of the 4 characters in the show.
Yeah.
So like, what are they doing? Like, at first I thought, are they controlling what's going on? But when I rewatched the episode several times, all it seems like they're doing is observing what's happening.
Yeah,
right?
like they would do an action and they would press like a button in response to sort of...
And it would switch, the button would switch a camera angle, but it wouldn't actually perform any function as far as we could tell.
Right. Like at one point it switches to like from a picture of like a Mark or someone like that, and then it switches to like vital signs.
Right,
and
that's
you're
right. That's right. Yeah. So it seems like they're observing, but are they actually doing anything? It doesn't. I couldn't find evidence that any buttons being pressed were actually influencing any action on screen, but maybe that
line, like some of these, we get a couple of sequences of these sort of observances that are happening, but that's also during one of these sequences where we get the line like, "Are the Severance, was it walls holding?" I forget the exact line.
Are the Severance barriers holding?
Yes.
My reaction was that like a lot of this is observing the technology and its effects, and that's what they're sitting observing is like, how do these different individuals, as they test, prod, and frankly push the boundaries of what Severance is capable of, how do those walls, how does the power hold, and like what do those react? Because I mean, again, like a lot of the questions we get with Gemma are, what like do you feel a pull to a different room? Like, do you remember anything? So it feels a lot of exploratory of what are the boundaries of Severance as a technology.
The question that was asked was, are the Severance barriers holding?
Barriers, yeah.
Right? Barriers plural, right? So it's like there's clearly like each room has its own barrier. There's also this question about these cards that they were making at O&D, which then appeared in the real world with Mark and Gemma in the past. And so like Lumon is fabricating things that are then like going out into the world. Is the world constructed in some way? You know, I think there's open questions about like what the base reality is, and we'll talk more about the cards later on in the episode. And then the other thing is, you know, one of Gemma's overseers is smitten with her, which seems to be a running theme at Lumon. They like to sever people and then get romantically involved with them. Pretty sick if you think about it. But after Cold Harbor is over, it becomes clear he'll have to quote unquote give her up for Kier. What does this mean? Does that mean Gemma will die? Does it mean that they're just not going to have interactions anymore? Gemma will be in a different form. Like, it's unclear, but it doesn't seem good, whatever is going to happen. So anyway, those are some things I think we know now, right? Patrick, that overall strike you as largely correct? I know we had the dispute about like how she got to Lumon.
I think that's disputing over the details of the broader point. But yes, I think, and that's what I think speaks to why this episode is so incredible. Like, lots of shows like this have to have, all right, exposition, like what are the rules, and how do we start filling in some of the blanks, and that's really satisfying, because I think this episode does that really well, while like hitting you with an emotional, jackhammer.
Indeed. So now that I've established what we know, let's talk about what actually happens this episode. Again, this is just my guess, putting together some of the stuff we know. Like, some of this might be inaccurate, but we'll do our best. So, like I said, there's 3 time periods. There's the present with Mark, Ragabi, and Devon at Mark's house. Let's just talk about this, Patrick, because there's only like 5 minutes of scenes in this plot line. So Ragabi has Mark on the couch. He's going to sleep for a while. She tells Devon, your brother's reintegrating. Devon wants Ragabi to stop. Ragabi reveals that Gemma's alive, and it's a lot for Devon to handle. But Ragabi explains he's stable. It's an isolated event. He's journeying now. Devon mentions the fact that there's an innie cabin, right? Like where that woman that she met gave birth. a lot of people online have pointed out like how difficult it would be to be in any that gives birth. Like you wake up, you're pregnant, you're in labor, you're giving birth, then the baby's taken away from you, then you go back to sleep, and then you wake up again and you're giving birth again. It's basically like a hellish existence.
We get a different glimpse of that with the dentist scene, where
Absolutely.
like that version of Gemma comes in, is like, can I have a break? It's like, it's been 6 weeks, and I don't have a fear of dentists, but like the way that people like hate hearing like like fingers scratching on a chalkboard is getting your teeth scraped to like get the gunk off. And I sat there and I wanted to cry for her. I was like, the idea that you would be locked in to this for eternity is, well, maybe hell does exist, or at least is a human construct, because that sounds nightmarish.
I'm just gonna say I love my dentist. I love going to the dentist. So even if it is painful, because I'm like, they're making my teeth better.
I didn't say I wasn't. I'm not resentful. I'm a perfectly fine. I don't like it. I find it to be a very unpleasant experience to have my teeth scraped like they are a chalkboard. I think that's a reasonable feeling to have.
I think her reaction is really interesting, right? Because if you can imagine, well, let's get to it later, Patrick. Let's get to it when we get to the thing. But okay, so there's an innie cabin, and Devon is thinking, hey, let's take Mark to the innie cabin. Then he'll become his innie, and we can explain to him what's going on, and that'll work out. So Devon thinks about calling Miss Cobell to get instructions to get to the innie cabin. Maybe they can transition Mark to his innie self. But then Ragabi is very upset by Miss Cobell's possible involvement, because Miss Cobell is a true believer. And so she's like, you do not want her involved at all in this. And so then
they say they raised her like that. The phrasing is they raised her. She's a soldier. And then that calls into a lot of questions about like the strange reality of the kind of company town that exists around Lumon. And then you start to think of the implications of, like, as you said, like if the Sever technology is capable of all sorts of different like personalities or versions of oneself, that's a lot to consider. Yeah.
So then Ragabi leaves, very freaked out by the possibility of Cobell being involved, and then eventually Mark wakes up. And that's kind of that whole plot line. Any comments on that, Patrick, before we move on to the much more interesting stuff?
Well, I mean, I think Ragabi being that spooked, that like just says like by all like, there's like reason to think that Mark could die, like reasonable reason to think Mark could die without like extended care that like in theory Ragabi would have knowledge of or be able to try and deal with. And I mean, as much as she's worried about Miss Cobell, she is like as much a true believer. Like she's like has a very like revolutionary like feel to her. It's like, well, Mark was the tool for me to accomplish the destruction of Lumon. Well, I guess that tool is not useful anymore. I'm leaving, and I will go find another tool to take down this company or whatever action she is trying to. Her motivations remain, I think, a bit of a mystery. I doubt it's the last we've seen of her, but it really, I think, reinforces how strong she is in her beliefs. Like she doesn't care about Mark. Mark is just like, Mark chose to be severed. Like you chose to be like, and I'm trying to use what I got in front of me. I'll go find someone else. And I think that's how she views it.
She's burning her life to make a sunrise she'll never see, Patrick Klepek.
Damn,
that's Ragabi's whole
look
deal.
at that. Look at that.
All right, let's talk about what's going on in the past with Mark and Gemma. The episode opens, we're following a woman. It's Miss Casey. We're using a handheld camera to follow a woman. It's like, holy shit, this episode looks unlike any other episode of Severance, because we're like out of the town, or I guess we might be in the town, we're at the college.
Yeah.
But like the colors are super saturated. They're very warm. Which like all of Severance is very cold, like very blue tints, very like cold. Anything is warm is meant to indicate like, red, orange. Warm is meant to indicate like outside the severed floor. There's handheld camera. There's freaking stop motion. There's CG. There's all these different stylistic things to indicate, hey, this is a dreamlike episode. It is not in the style of the reality that we typically see normal Severance.
It's trying to capture emotion, right? Like, which is different. Like Severance is can often feel very clinical, right? It's the aesthetic of the severed floor and Lumon. Right. I think the cinematography,
very controlled camera movements. Yep, often very like the camera is not moving most of the time.
Right, and like there's like multiple scenes like across this timeline where like Mark and Gemma are being, intimate with one another, and like you're getting like just very, hazy light coming in and filtering through
lens flares and all this.
Yeah, it's conveying a completely different emotional palette than like we watch. The show is often shot like very controlled and clinically, and then our characters express motions through that lens, and that's powerful in its own way. But here, it's just operating in a completely different mode and tenor that feel. I mean, it's obviously beautiful, but it's so jarring compared to the style of the rest of the show, and even the way it bounces between the two styles across this episode itself.
It's Mark and Gemma. Before Gemma passed away, they're at Gans College, I believe is the college they used to work at. They're donating blood, and it's the first time they meet. So we see a little meet cute over the donating of blood, and then we see like flashbacks to the rest of their relationship. There's a moment where he sees Gemma sneeze twice, which is a callback to something that happened, something that he said in season 1, where he's like, "My wife always sneezed twice." So I wanted to throw that out. We see a bunch of flashbacks to their relationship. He brings her an ant farm, even though she hates ants. They discuss him putting together furniture. There's some Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind style stop motion action. They have dinner with Rick and Devon. It's clear that Gemma was pregnant, but then she has a miscarriage. They're in a doctor's office. We see Gemma fill out a patient intake form at a fertility center. We see all these things from Mark's memory. A scene where Gemma is there in the severed floor to observe Heli R. That's from season 1. Then we end up in a room where Mark is being observed, and maybe someone's doing macro data refining on him, and there's like bizarro versions of the 4 main characters. Drummond speaks to a dude in a tracksuit and mustache and said, "Are the severed barriers holding?" She's easy, you're fond of her. She's easy to like. Didn't she try and break your fingers? Let's come back to that later. Anyway, Mark and Gemma, after the miscarriage, right, they try fertility treatments. But then, like, we learned that the IVF didn't work, and that's a very painful process. That's a very painful weeks-long process or months-long process, possibly years-long process. If you know anyone who has tried to do fertility treatments, it's like a very, very excruciating process.
Having kids fucking sucks. As someone who's gone through it twice, I took years and years for us to have both kids. Ended up having them, quote, naturally, but like explored fertility. And like one of the things I found very beautiful about and moving about this episode in particular, and my wife is very moved, is like the real like care it shows for like we barely know Gemma. Like this is a character that is talked about, and our visual interactions with her are someone that like we don't know like what's going on. And the ability for this episode to run an entire marathon of emotions, like compacted into a singular episode, I think is really wonderful. And a lot of that is accomplished in the level of detail, like the way these miscarriages and the complications of getting pregnant, the frustrations, like the ecstasy of trying and the crushing disappointment of not accomplishing what you're trying to get is captured like really beautifully. I mean, the roller coaster of having children, like anyone that has gone through that, like either like in your circle of friends and family or personally, like it is 100% captured here in like the most heartbreaking fashion. And I think it goes a really long way to closing the gap on this like clinical, like what we don't like. All we hear is Mark talk about Gemma.
Yeah.
He talks about their relationship. She's like someone who exists in the past. She is a ghost to us as the audience because the character we've seen on the severed floor, but might as well not be her. And by choosing to use this lens of getting pregnant and the difficulties they have along the way, and just how trying that is on, it's one of the hardest things you can exact on a relationship, is like goes so far to getting us into a better place with these characters emotionally, because they capture it pretty much like 100% accurately for the lived experiences of a lot of people. So just wanted to point out that part in particular really, really struck me because they capture the experience beautifully. And I think just on a storytelling level, it just does so much efficient work to get us into such a different place with these characters by the end of the episode.
I think that's a great call out, Patrick. I appreciate you sharing that. There is a moment where Gemma's in the fertility clinic, and I didn't spot this until you mentioned it, but they do pass by what looks like Dr. Mauer, right?
Yeah,
There's
like it's very
there's a
very
focus.
briefly.
There's a focus pull. Like for like a second, you see Dr. Mauer there, and it's like, oh, I wonder if this is how they first encountered. This is how like Lumon first encountered Gemma, perhaps, and then when they tested her, they're like, oh, you could actually be useful for other things. Like, who knows?
My presumption was that fertility clinics are where very vulnerable, emotionally sensitive people go for one of the most like difficult decisions they're making and things they're navigating. And boy, that seems like a place to pick up and exploit emotionally vulnerable people if you were a company like Lumon. And so when I saw we rewound it, I was like, that sure looks like that horrible doctor. I do think that is the case.
All right. Back in the past, we're seeing Mark and Gemma's relationship develop and how they survive the infertility and so on. And there is a moment where like present Mark speaks the word Chikai Bardo, and then it cuts to like past Mark speaking the word Chikai Bardo.
Chikai Bardo. I don't know. It looks like two guys fighting.
Now, I have watched this scene 5 times, and here is what I understand about what is going on here. All right. So first of all, the episode is titled Chikai Bardo. What is Chikai Bardo? According to deathreference.com, Bardo means a between state, an interval or transition between two mental states, whether experienced in life or after death. On the Tibetan view, death is not an instantaneous event, but a process taking several days, involving a successive dissociation of mind from body, which is manifested in characteristic outward signs. During this process, the conscious mind experiences 3 main Bardo states. The first of these, called the Chikai Bardo, is the experience of the death point, the moment at which the soul loses consciousness of objects and becomes aware only of itself. The experience is described as a vivid, formless light emanating from all sides. At this moment, enlightenment lies close at hand, although one's capacity to attain it depends on the extent to which one has achieved lucidity and detachment in one's previous existence, end quote. So that's what Chikai Bardo is a reference to. And there was also another movie, by the way, called Bardo that came out by Iñárritu. I don't know if you saw that on Netflix. Anyway, Bardo, very, very much in vogue these days in movies and TV. Okay, so Mark says the word Chikai Bardo, right? We cut to Gemma in the past filling out some survey, right? Now, I have freeze-framed that survey, and you see some words on it, and I will tell you what those words are, but it apparently seems like some kind of sweepstakes situation. So I'm pulling it up on my phone right now, and hopefully our amazing editor John is showing this on screen. But you see like fill out the entire survey to be entered to win something every week for life. That's double our $5,000 weekly prize, right? And so she's filling out a survey, and then next to the survey, there's all these ideographic cards that are similar to the cards that Dylan stole from the first season. Now, what am I talking about? In season 1, episode 6, the whole macro data refinement crew goes to O&D, optics and design. And Mark gives a speech and says, hey, we need to rally together as innies and overcome the system. Dylan wanders around the O&D fabrication machines and sees a bucket of these cards. And he takes the card of a guy kind of karate chopping someone. And then later on, Milchek activates the overtime contingency and says, the ideographic card you took from O&D, you have no idea how sensitive this information is. Tell me where you put the card, right? So that's from season 1. I have compared the cards from season 1 to the cards that we see on Gemma's table. The card that she is holding up to the camera is identical. It's like this card where this guy's like kind of doing this, movement where he's hitting himself. And I think Gemma or Mark or whatever interpreted that card as Chikai Bardo, which is like ego death, like you're in the process of dying and achieving enlightenment, because it's a guy hitting himself. That's what Gemma says because they have the same haircut. Now, I don't think that's what that card is, but like that's what her interpretation of it is. I do want to point out that aside from that one card, the rest of the cards on Gemma's table are different than the set of cards in season 1. In season 1, when Dylan picks up the card and hides it and then activates overtime contingency, the rest of the cards are all very clearly like kind of two dudes touching and hitting each other, right? And so they're almost like jujitsu style card, like showing martial arts or something like that. On Gemma's table, the rest of the cards are much more sedate. There's a card of a guy sitting, looking in a corner, like just sitting in a corner. There's a card of a guy looking at a clock and he has his dog there. So it's like a different set of cards on Gemma's table than Dylan saw in season 1. How significant is any of this? I don't know. But what does seem clear to me is that O&D likely fabricated the cards that were sent to Gemma, and that she was writing maybe her interpretation in some survey to win money, I think is the interpretation. And then presumably like through this, they probably reached out and said, hey, Gemma, you're a perfect fit for this thing that we're doing. And that's how we end up with present day Gemma underneath the halls of Lumon. Patrick, did that all make sense?
I mean, look, this is an episode filled with things that let you start filling in the blanks if you are not a crazy person who is zooming in on the images of like there's a reason that the show doesn't like pan the camera over, pause on it, and like really let you take it in. Like I feel like it's one of those things where like your interpretation of where we're at, I feel like is the best we can do with the information that we have. And I think it's backed up as being quote important by the fact that it's a callback to like the show saying like these are important in season 1. I think where I fall on it is that I think we're starting to get a sense of Lumon's recruitment, like whether like they end up like filling in all the gaps on like what these cards specifically mean or looking for. Like I don't know. Like I think there are probably better mysteries to be solved than like the show getting I hope the show never gets obsessed with explaining all of its iconography. Like some of it can just be left to it's weird. Lumon's weird. That's fine. Like it looked cool. Like let it lie. But I think at the end of the day, this is part of the recruiting that Lumon does to bring in people into their fold.
I'm just gonna say I found this whole sequence to be quite frustrating as somebody who makes a podcast that is currently about Severance, because there's just so many jumps you have to make. Like, why is he saying Chikai Bardo? What does Chikai Bardo mean? Why does Gemma think this card represents Chikai Bardo? What is Gemma even doing? She says, quote, it's one of those things where you have to draw a duck or a rabbit or whatever. And it's like, I don't even know what she's talking about. There's like
and the episode is titled this, right? Like, and whether that's a red herring or it's just, I mean, the titles of Severance episodes are often kind of cheeky. And even it's very funny to go. I do recommend this. Like, read the episode summaries. Like after you've watched it, it's like okay, like I guess
it's very vague.
I guess that is thematically what happened, but you were clearly having some fun with it.
Anyway, my point being that that's my best. Like I found it to be very inscrutable, and so I presented my best interpretation, and hopefully
I think it's meant to be inscrutable. I think you've done your best, David.
Thank you, Patrick. All right, I do want to just mention one other thing, which is when Milchick returns the ideographic card to Bert G in season 1. Bert G says, "The missing 7199G. Oswald will be so delighted."
The missing 7199G. Oswald will be so delighted.
I don't know if that'll be significant later, but I just wanted to call it out that that's a thing that is said about that card that we see in this episode. So who knows? We flash back. We see Mark's trying to put together furniture. It looks like maybe a crib. I don't know. It's going terribly. Their house is filled with sadness. And then there's one final flashback where it's the night of Gemma's accident. Gemma leaves. Then police approach Mark's house. It's clear that she's died. It's terrible. It's very sad. And that is the stuff that happens in the past. Anything else before we move on to present day with Gemma at Lumon?
No, I will. It just is another call out to how beautifully this was shot. Like, how many times have we watched in a movie or a television show a person approach the door with police officers about to deliver bad news? Yeah. And yet this show did it in a way that was, the way it conveyed emotion in its shot choices, the way it uses darkness and shadows,
lighting and shadows. Yeah,
like the way that one transition where like it's like you see like I think Gemma walking down a hallway like while he's approaching, like just fucking gore. I get just astounded at some of the stuff that happens there.
Agreed. All right, final plot line: present day with Gemma at Lumon. Okay. Gonna do my best to get through this. Here we go. Gemma is giving blood, only it's under corporate auspices, like she was giving blood in the past. But this time she's at Lumon. She's probably being tested. We see Gemma in her outfit from the freeze frame at the end of episode 1 with Cold Harbor. The nurse addresses her as Gemma. So it is Gemma, right? It's not some other severed personality. She's like heavily under monitoring. There's an eye chart with goats. Very cute. The medical professional asks if Gemma has done her 50 pages of reading and her calisthenics, and then asks her questions like, if you were caught in a mudslide, would you be more afraid of suffocating or drowning? Gemma asks, how many rooms do I need to go into today? And she says 6, and she's like, oh, 6 is going to be a tough one. And imagine what the experience for Gemma must be, right? She's going into these 6 rooms. She's getting severed every single time she goes in. So like you go into a room, you come out, and like some body part of yours hurts afterwards. You go and you come out, your jaw is in pain. You go and you come out, your leg hurts. Like it's like you can imagine it must be like a very challenging, and you don't know what happens. Like I don't think she's told like what's going on in any of these rooms, right?
Which funny is doing all these rooms, these severance, it sounds like getting old. Like why does my hip hurt? Did I do anything with that yesterday?
Yeah.
And I don't even have the benefit of blaming it on going into a severed room. It's just my hip hurts.
It's just your actual body decomposing. Yeah. They walk past signs on these rooms that say words like Allentown and Cairns and Drainsville. These are the file names that MDR has worked on. So presumably, like what MDR is working on is related to what is going on in these rooms. Maybe they're programming these rooms. Maybe they're like their work is contributing to how the severance is occurring, the emotions that she's feeling. Who knows? Miss Casey arrives at a room called Wellington. The nurse person opens a door, which requires a drop of her blood, which, by the way, seems painful to do that every single time she needs to go into a room. But I think it's also to indicate that Miss Casey cannot activate the rooms herself, right? Yeah. So anyway, Gemma steps into the room and is severed. The doctor from episode 5 arrives. He's actually a dentist, and those were actual dental tools he was requesting. And as you said earlier, Patrick, she needs to get some dental work done. And for this version of Gemma, this is all she knows. She just gets dental work done every day. And yeah, like if you think about it, if you were to wake up as an innie, you would not know what like life is. And somebody tells you, hey, by the way, like, this is what your life is. You're just getting dental work done all day. Like there's nothing, that's what your whole existence is. And there's probably part of her that would feel like that's wrong, but then part of her would probably be like, okay, I guess that's true. Like I don't know anything else that's going on. Like she doesn't
feel like that's how a dentist Gemma feels. Dentist Gemma feels like depressed, emotionally crushed, and I wouldn't be surprised if dentist Gemma is the one that broke that guy's fingers.
No, possible, but I don't know, Patrick. I think what I'm trying to say is I think like the innies, in my opinion, including Miss Casey, are very pliable. Like they're very like, yes, you're right. She's not happy, Patrick, because she's in physical discomfort. But like, she ultimately submits to what he's asking.
You can't. It's the lack of information. You can't articulate why you're sad, but they're clearly sad. Like,
no, that's true. But like, she ultimately submits. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
Like, she ultimately does.
If you don't know any better, like how
you don't know any better. That's what I'm saying. You don't know any better. Yeah.
I'm being oppressed, but I don't understand.
I don't understand what's happening. Yeah.
Is it possible that I couldn't be? I could say.
Gemma emerges from the room, but she doesn't realize she was in there for 2 hours. They pass a door that has the words Cold Harbor on it. I wonder what is inside that door.
I was hooting and hollering. I was like, woo, 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 woo.
It's the thing. That's the thing that they've been talking about all season. Yeah. We also learned, by the way, that the place where they're in is where the exports hall goes to. Why? That's where O&D ships all their stuff, and they're creating all these like elaborate realities. Later, the dentist, whose name is Dr. Maurer, is interrogating Gemma, asks, how are you feeling? Which room caused your mouth to hurt? The first one, the Wellington room. And, she goes through the other room names, the Wellington room, Billings, Lucknow, St. Pierre, Cairns, Zurich. These are all file names, right? Gemma remembers visiting the 6 rooms, but doesn't remember feeling anything. And then the question is asked of her, did you exit any of the rooms feeling despair, fervor, gaiety? She explains there's only one room I haven't been to, and today it had a name on it, Cold Harbor. She asks, what happens once I've been in all the rooms? And Dr. Mara says, you will see the world again, and the world will see you. And then she says, so I'll see Mark. So it's like, oh, Gemma knows. This is the version of Gemma that knows about Mark.
Yeah.
And Dr. Mara says, Mark will benefit from the world you're siring.
Mark will benefit from the world you're siring.
Weird way to say that.
Yeah, don't. If you don't want to sound like a supervillain, maybe use other words, friend.
And then later he says, Kier will take away all his pain, just as Kier has taken away yours. Now, I do think that it does seem to indicate, like, one of the reasons, as you hinted at, Patrick, why she might be here at all is because she is trying to get over the pain of the miscarriage and the infertility, right? Like, and that Lumon has offered her some solution to that. How has Kier taken away her pain is like, you can be severed and you don't need to think about any of these things, but like, again, what was Lumon's pitch? We don't understand yet, but
right.
Like that's probably part of it. Okay. In another incident, Gemma opens the door and she's in a plane that's about to crash. And I think it's Dr. Maurer that's like trying to serve her drinks at the same time.
There's so much sadness in this episode and exploitation. And yet I was just like dying laughing during this
that was a
particular
funny one.
sequence. Because he's got a funny wig on and everything and slaps down this meal and just weird stuff.
So we see, like, again, it cuts to this room of this bizarro severed floor where it's like bizarro versions of the four characters in the show. Like, they kind of look vaguely like the four characters in the show, and they're observing those characters via their computer screens. And Dr. Maurer is speaking with Drummond, and they talk about how Mark is at 96% completion. The nosebleed set us back. So they basically know everything that's going on. They know, like, they've probably seen Mark and Helly have sex. Like, they know everything's happening. And they talk about, like, when he's done, you're going to have to say goodbye to her. Like, you, Dr. Maurer, are going to need to say goodbye to her for Kier. And he's like, yep, I totally get that. But
not sure he does. Not sure. I don't believe he gets that.
That guy, let me just put this out there. That guy sucks. I hate that guy. Dr. Maurer, I think, right?
Yeah. The ability for a character we essentially have not met it's a real compliment to the acting in order to imbue that much menace and hatred into a character that essentially we have known for this episode alone.
Am I getting that name right, by the way? Dr. Maurer, does that sound familiar to you?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Because it's not listed publicly yet. So I just want to make sure. I might double confirm that just in case. But anyway, earlier on, she's like, hey, like, I'm fond of her. And by the way, I think she's kind of fond of me. I think she's kind of fond of me too. That's like Dr. Maurer. And it's like, okay, really? Maybe it's the fact that it's a total like ex machina situation where it's like, actually, she just wants to get the fuck out of here. Like, she doesn't really care about you, she's just pretending to be nice so you don't hurt her in some way. But yeah. Okay. What else happens with present day at Gemma? Gemma enters a room where she needs to write out like 50 thank you Christmas cards, and Dr. Maurer is there pretending to be her husband. And she's like, how much longer do I have to do this? I told you you're done, but Christmas has a funny way of coming back around each year. And she says it's always Christmas. So like, you can imagine she leaves the room, she comes back, it's Christmas again. It's always Christmas. The Dr. Maurer says, I love you. And Gemma says, I love you too. But you get the feeling she doesn't really mean it. You know what I'm saying? I feel like she doesn't really mean it.
Yeah, I don't think he had to go that far to take that interpretation. Do you? I wonder. Maybe this would be.
Really,
curious.
I think I'm bringing some piercing insight here. Anyway, go ahead.
Do you think there's a world where these rooms are different? We don't know much about Kier, right? Like, do these rooms represent different parts of Kier's life that Gemma is experiencing in some way or some fashion?
It's possible.
Like, they're just such hyper specific scenario. You know what I mean? Like, going to at first when I saw the dentist, like, oh, I guess maybe these rooms just represent different things one does in life,
right.
and like in the same way that we talked about, like, the woman that experiences birth and that as a severed person. But then the Christmas tree, like the dress, like, I don't know, it all seems like there's a world where it's like very hyper specific. Like, why does she wear this? Why does her hair look like this? Like, because maybe these are pulling from very specific core memories related to, if not Kier, then like whatever they're doing with Gemma on this floor.
I think that's very possible. That's a very plausible interpretation. Would love to hear what our listeners think as well. Feel free to email us at decodingtv@gmail.com or comment on the YouTube channel. I just double checked, by the way. It is Dr. Mara. Thank goodness I did not get that wrong. Okay. Anyway, there is a conversation where Dr. Maurer talks with Gemma at the very end of the episode. He's asking her questions about her experiences. Again, what room caused your hand to hurt? She says, Allentown. That's the one with the Christmas cards. She says, I want to go home. And he says, your husband remarried last year. And he has a daughter now. You've been gone a long time, Gemma. He's moved on. Maybe you've moved on too, in one of the rooms. What do you think? Do you feel yourself gravitating towards one room or another? Maybe you felt things behind those doors you never felt with Mark. Maybe I've seen it.
He's moved on. Maybe you've moved on too.
Which is just like, oh, this guy
Capital
makes me so
creepy.
He's
that feels like he's going off the Lumon handbook. I don't think Kier said you need to give off sexual predator vibes in the room to really understand Cold Harbor.
He's like, maybe in that room where I forced you to write those cards, you really loved me. You know, it's like, dude, this is so sick. Like, you're already like subjugating her mind and body. Do you have to try to do you have to convince yourself that she loves you too?
Well, and then I don't know what you thought about
really
this.
Fascist behavior. Okay, go ahead.
There's a I don't know if it's a callback or just a coincidence, but I think was it Allentown? That's the Christmas room where I said I love you. And he's like, I said I love you.
Yeah.
Well, Gemma and Mark have a very similar interaction where when Gemma leaves to go to the party that Mark declines.
Because she says I love you, and then he doesn't respond.
Right. And then she pauses like, I said I love you. And there's like a sinister version of that where it's like Lumon is aware of like Mark's mannerisms, and he like in his way of trying to like ingratiate himself with Gemma is actually going to like act like I don't know if that was coincidence or not, but I took note of that. It was like, that's a very specific exchange those two had that he then plays out. And it's like very clearly setting up that he is not going to want to give up this plastic doll that he's been playing with on this floor of Lumon. And he certainly seems like the kind of person that would use an interaction with Mark that he is aware of to subconsciously try and create some sort of subconscious emotional connection between him and whatever severed Gemma that he's dealing with.
Yeah, very possibly. And again, we know that Mark is critical to the work. So I think there's a lot of potential truth to what you're saying. Okay. Anyway, this guy sucks. I hate him. Not only is he super creepy and predatory, but then he pulls out this book and he says, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. Let me guess, he dies at the end?
The death of Ivan Ilyich. Let me guess. He dies at the end.
So, okay, you're a freaking piece of shit. Like, you know, like, how dare you question the works of Leo Tolstoy as well? Anyway, like, or minimize. But anyway, from Wikipedia,
strong Twitter reply guy energy.
Oh yeah,
radiating from like, this doctor pays for a check mark. Like, we know it. Like he does.
The Death of Ivan Ilyich was published in 1886. I'm reading here from Wikipedia by Leo Tolstoy, considered one of his masterpieces of late fiction. It tells the story of a high court judge in a 19th century Russia and his sufferings and death from a terminal illness. End quote. The idea is also that like Ivan Ilyich, like he's dying. So the doctor got it right. He does die. And he kind of comes to terms with like his life and his death as like the book reaches its conclusion. All right. Right when he says he dies at the end, Gemma freaking knocks him in the skull with a chair. And Gemma escapes with her, but her nurse person is out in the hall too. And she grabs Dr. Maurer's key card and uses it to get upstairs. But when she gets upstairs to the exports hall elevator, she becomes severed again, and Miss Casey, brutal. She like Miss Casey is like confused, like what's happening. And what's awesome is Milchick shows up, and you can tell he's just like slightly out of breath because like they've clearly had to call him really rapidly. And it's a great performance of like you can imagine he's like, oh, okay, and he's like, hey, Miss Casey, your Audi came in for a public art exposition and found herself in the art exhibition and found herself in the wrong elevator. If you wouldn't mind turning around and heading back, would be greatly appreciated. Again, showing how innies are really pliable. Like you can just they don't know that much, so that you can convince them of anything. You know, they're very childlike, and so they don't even need to subjugate her. Like they don't need to put her in cuffs or anything. They're just like, hey, just turn around and go back to the elevator. Like we're good to go. And then when Gemma arrives back at the bottom of the elevator, she's upset because she's like, oh, I really am trapped here. I cannot get out of the severed floor.
And part of what's like really interesting about that step is like this season is doing a lot of work to make you empathetic and feel for Milchick. And then this sequence happens, and it's just like you like I feel bad for you, but then you do this to Gemma, my Gemma. Like you would. Now, how much does he know? You know, I mean, it is unclear whether he's been
right.
to that
Like,
floor.
how much does he know about what is happening to Gemma? Right. Like,
right. Like, so I guess I can give him a little more. I give a little more leeway there, but I will say, like, I thought it was an interesting trick on the show's part where it's like, hey, like, there's reason for you to be sympathetic to Milchick's cause and how he feels about his role and how he's being dehumanized. And I mean, that just, maybe that'll be part of what the show is about, is like how that dehumanization goes all the way down the chain. And like, you can feel for Milchick, but also like you're a monster for how you're treating like this innie or like whatever story he has been told. It's probably true that he doesn't know much about what's going on other than what he's told to do. But I thought it was interesting to have so much work done with this character and then to have him play a villainous role against Miss Casey / Gemma at this point in the episode.
all right. I think that's all of it, Patrick Klepek.
Except for all the stuff we missed. That's all of it, David.
Except for all the stuff we missed, all the little details and hints that we missed. That's all of it. I think my big takeaways are, holy crap, that guy, Dr. Maurer, is super creepy. I hate him so much. You know, it's who knows what other intentions he has or what other plans he has. I'm really curious I wish there was an explanation for what is going on in that creepy room with the four counterparts of the people. Like what are they doing? Why do they look similar to their counterpart? Like, is there something about like you need to have a similar DNA or what phenotype or whatever in order to be able to like observe them in this some questions are answered, but like many more questions are raised, and that's what a good show generally does. But
if Severance is in some ways going to be about like technological fascism, like genetics, eugenics, like all of that is all on the table, like
Absolutely.
David, for like what Lumon might be after in terms of the control it would like to exert over, the world, and what it's doing within these walls.
Any other thoughts, Patrick? Great episode.
Great episode. Yeah. What, 2 more to go? That is sad.
3 more to go, Patrick.
3 more to go? Okay, wow. All right. Well, my day's even better because I can't count. Great to hear. What I like about this, and again, I mentioned earlier that I feel like this episode in some ways is killing off some popular fan theories, or at least throwing out some. Yeah. Well, I like this emotional core. Like, this gives like such a great foundation for where the show can go from here, which like as the show has to start filling in blanks about what Lumon is, I didn't want it to like, and that's what I've complimented this season. I didn't want it to lose sight of what makes the show interesting in the first place, which is like a really cool this really cool concept paired with like really interesting characters and putting some humanity into Gemma, like catching her up with everybody else and making us emotionally invested in her plight and where she's at. Just makes, it raises the stakes of everything in the show to a degree that I cannot wait to see where all this ends up. It's just like the implications of the world building and the emotional depth of the characters and what they might do as a result of what they now know. I have no clue where this season ends, and we're closer to the end than the beginning. And that's a great place to be with a show that is continuing to operate at an extremely high level.
Any guesses as to what Cold Harbor is or what it's all building up to?
No, I'm further away, David,
yeah.
than I am ever before. It throws away the theory that it's had something to do with her dying in the car crash, right? And Cold Harbor being a reference to like, oh, she's in the ice. She died in the car and she's cold. Like, I don't think that's true anymore. So
let me put this out there. Let me put out a theory about what's going on. And I didn't have a chance to think this through super well. So like, this is just off the top of the head, off the dome right now.
Hit me.
But there is this line that Dr. Maurer says. He says, Kier will take away all his pain just as Kier has taken away yours. And my guess as to what is happening is the idea of we now know that people can sever you into like multiple different spaces. Maybe they can sever you when it comes to different emotions, right? Maybe they can sever you when it comes to like grief or pain. And so like all the grief and pain is felt by like one part of you, and then everything else is felt by another part. And that would be like Kier taking away all your pain. And so like one person can have like 8 different severed selves, but the idea is that like, your true self doesn't experience any of the bad emotions or something along those lines. Just a wild guess. I have no idea about any of this, but like it does seem like they're trying to improve society in some way, right? So like that's kind of why they believe that what they're doing is one of the most momentous events in Earth's history. So what is on that scale that would achieve that, right? And so one of those things could be figuring out a way to take away people's pain, figuring out a way to sever people's pain.
And what if you could choose? The hard work of things like therapy is like working through what happened to you, what you've experienced, how you feel about it, and like coming out on the other side of that. What if the promise of Silicon Valley is like, what if technology could just solve that for you? What if instead of working through the things that happened to you, you could just sever it away and choose a new life? Like you could just walk through this door, and that's the new you. Like you have severed that off from yourself, and you can start again. And the pitch is like, oh, but like the other parts of yourself, like subconsciously it will make you a better person. Like BS. Like that's not what, like, I think this show is very much in line with the Silicon Valley ethos of like wielding technology like a hammer, regardless of who hurts in the process, and promising that it's going to make your life better. And I think who it actually benefits is just Lumon at the end of the day.
In the Christian conception of heaven, people have described heaven in different ways, right? And some people conceive it as, hey, we're just spending all of our time like singing hymns and praising God forever. Like that's what kind of heaven has been described as occasionally. I know some people have different conceptions of it, but it's like, I wonder if Lumon is trying to do some version of that on Earth, where like everyone is just super thrilled with Kier all the time on Earth, and they all the other parts of themselves they can sever. Just another idea. So I'm liking my theories, Patrick. I think this is just as good as the Ragabi isn't a real person.
Well, I think this episode opens the door to lots of new theories, which is like really like as many that like seem like they are dying on the vine. It's opening the door to a bunch of other really exciting interpretations of what might be going on in a fun way as opposed to a frustrating way. And I think that's just a real compliment to the world building that they're doing in this show.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.